found a number of interesting things, but I would say one of the biggest takeaways is this idea of psychological safety. And that is actually the number one predictor of an effective team.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Awesome Inc.'s podcast, where we highlight people pursuing their definition of, you guessed it, awesome. So buckle up and get ready for some more success story adventures and failures from Kentucky's tech and entrepreneur community. Welcome back, everyone, to hanging out with us here at Awesome Inc. Yes, I know it's a podcast, but we want to think that you're in the room, feet propped up on the coffee table, bucket of popcorn or whatever you like to watch with your shows. We are super thrilled to have probably the most incredible person we've had in our space in December. I can say that confidently, Liz. Jamie is a boomerang. I'm going to steal a bit of Liz's thunder, who's been all around the world, East Coast, West Coast, and has popped back into Kentucky. You couldn't hear that pop really well. My chapstick kind of muffled it. So sorry, guys. It was a really good sound effect. But we are excited for the conversation we're going to have. There's going to be quite a bit of fun. And I'm actually going to pass it off to my PIC, my partner in crime.
I've never heard that made into an acronym before.
Yeah, I heard it, I think, on a Disney Channel show when I was a kid.
So it is a thing? You're not just forcing it to be a thing?
No,
okay.
I'd like to think so. I mean, okay. I could say PIC, my partner in conversation, because that's more so what this is.
I see what you
partner
did there.
in crime sounds better. So Liz, take it away. I'll shut up.
Sounds good. Hey guys, I'm Liz. I am with Venture Labs, our newest program here at Awesome Inc. We are helping corporate companies stay innovative. But how we're having fun with that is we've been bringing some of the best friends of Venture Labs onto the show. Garrett has kindly let us host them. So a big part of my job at Venture Labs, as a reminder, is building a community of people who care about innovation as much as we do. And we've got another one today. So I'm going to introduce Jamie here in a second. But before I get started, speaking of building that community, I'm going to make an absolutely shameless plug for our newsletter. We are building our bi-monthly newsletter. If you want to be a part of what we're doing here, if you want to get the link to this podcast that Jamie, just to hear what Jamie has to say today, head to awesomeinc.org/Venture Labs. It'll be in the show notes. And we would love to hang out in your inbox a couple times a month. So today we have Jamie. She is a boomerang, which, as Garrett said, is a term we are desperately trying to normalize at Awesome Inc. She grew up here. She left to spread her wings at Cornell. She's spent time at Google and has, for now, it sounds like, decided to come back, take advantage of some remote learning and further her career. So Jamie, I'll let you tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you come from, what you spent time doing, and what you're up to now.
Sounds great. It's awesome to be here. Thank you for the kind intros. And yes, like you both mentioned, I'm a boomerang similar to others on this podcast and associated with Awesome Inc. in that I was born and raised in Lexington, and I moved to New York, lived in California, lived in England. And the more places I lived, the more I realized that Lexington is a pretty great place to call home. And I'm excited to be back here, returned back in April of this year. But in terms of my background and my story, like I mentioned, was born and raised in Lexington. And to be perfectly honest, I was and still am a pretty big nerd. So I spent most of my childhood doing ballet at Lexington Ballet and studying, learning, reading just about anything I could, especially anything on the topic of psychology and human behavior. So I was really drawn to the question of why do people do what they do, especially when that is irrational behavior. So not just why do people buy more groceries when the prices go down, but why would they buy more when the prices go up, which is actually a thing with some luxury goods. So trying to just explore different human biases and make sense of them. So I then went to Cornell, where I studied economics and psychology to focus in on behavioral economics, which is the field that really studies human biases that are widespread. And from there, I worked in a number of psychology research labs, and I thought it'd be pretty cool to go into academia. It seemed pretty great to just come up with different research questions, study them, and then get to write them up and go on to your next project. But I actually realized it'd be much cooler to put these great findings into practice. And that's where I actually realized Google was a company that did just that. They hired a number of psychologists and statisticians, and they used all these interesting findings and research methods and theories from social sciences to apply them to their workplace. So that led me to the path to Google, where I worked in a number of roles there. And yeah, like Liz mentioned, I'm back in Kentucky, focusing on getting my MBA at Vanderbilt, actually, and looking to do something a bit more entrepreneurial. But excited to dig in to some of the different research that I worked on while at Google and just different topics on innovation and team building and things like that.
That's great. We love people who do both corporate and entrepreneurial stuff. So you're in the right space. So you and I talked a little bit about your history, Garrett, as well. But a lot of what you did, it sounds like at Google, and correct me if I'm wrong, was a lot around people analytics and design thinking. So can you dig into maybe one or both of those a little bit? What did that mean for your role? How did you take some of that research and apply it to, like, what was your day-to-day at Google?
Yeah, so people analytics is the practice of using social science research methods and theories to inform your people practices, programs, processes. So basically using rigorous research to inform everything you do at the company from the people perspective. And I wouldn't say there was necessarily a typical day-to-day at Google, as the work really varied. And actually, I started in a rotational program. So one of the first teams that I was on was a people development team. And that's the team where we did a number of workshops. We did design thinking workshops, unconscious bias trainings, nuclear orientation, which was a whole series of workshops and programs for 2 days. But to focus in on the design thinking workshop that we ran, it was really adapted from the design school at Stanford. So if you're familiar with, they call it the D School, design thinking frameworks, it was adapted from that, where you start with empathizing with your users. You then move into expansive thinking, where it's all brainstorming and quantity over quality. And then you go into experimentation and really trying to get some real-time feedback and iterating before investing a number of resources in an idea without even testing it. So it's a 5-step process. And usually the workshops would run about 2 to 3 hours. And you go through, empathizing, defining the problem, ideating, creating your prototype and testing. And what it really helps with, one, the workshops are really helpful to refine an idea for different product teams. But 2, you're creating this culture where it's okay to not have the best idea. You're creating a culture where it's okay to fail quickly, to have more ideas, which will lead to more good ideas, but also more bad ideas. And people accept that. And some of the skills you learn in that is sort of yes and thinking, rather than just shutting an idea down before it's fully baked. So I think there's a lot of benefits, both in terms of like that 3-hour session where you're creating and innovating and iterating, but also the long-term effects on what it does to the culture.
I like that. Jamie, it sounds like you're good at improv based on what you just shared.
Oh boy.
We also,
test.
I feel like you're accidentally setting us up for complete success. And I told you a little bit about this, but you told me about this not even knowing about our Venture Labs workshops that we run, which as a lot of our listeners know, one of the things that we love doing here in the area is we go into corporate companies. We take a day of their time typically. So we take what you guys do in 2 to 3 hours and all day. But you basically sort of described and validated what we ask companies here in the Bluegrass to do, which is to bring in your employees, let them just brainstorm. We call it the customer journey, which you're saying is empathizing. So using that empathy muscle to say, what does our customer need? What's missing? What are the problems they're facing? And then any idea is a good idea at that point. Lay it all on the table. And then we help them kind of iterate those throughout the day, which I think it's interesting what you're saying is that really sets the tone for what to expect from maybe your leadership. Like a company that lets you go through that is a company, it's the one would think that then allows you to do that throughout your career. So I'm curious, in those workshops or sessions, was that only for new people in the company? Was that an orientation, or was anyone there? Do you guys was that just setting the tone for people who are just joining? Or is it like, hey, if you've got any idea, anyone can be in the room?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And these creative skills for innovation is what they're called. These workshops, they are introduced right when an employee joins the company to signal that, curiosity and innovation, it's something that requires everyone to engage in. It's not just something that one person is responsible for. So that's a big piece. But we also want to share that this is a resource that's available at any point as you're working at the company. And, when you're starting a project, if you want to brainstorm and use some of these tools to really define the problem and iterate what you're going to be working on, it's a really helpful framework to have kind of in your back pocket, and it's available, at any point in time for anyone. And actually, I'll share the link, but there's some great publicly available resources at rework.withgoogle.com, and it has the whole Google slide deck and some notes on running this type of workshop with your team, or even you can run it for others if you want the whole team to be engaged in the process and have sort of a separate facilitator. So we'll include that.
That's great. Do you have, and I don't know if this is something you can share, but like stories from those workshops or like moments when maybe a new employee was like, wow, this was the kind of like ethos of a company that I wanted to see. They're letting me do this, or ideas that came out of it. Like, what did you kind of observe for what that did for company culture in those workshops? Yeah,
I think I personally heard a lot of feedback where people were just really surprised that the company was willing to take 3 hours out of the day to teach these skills to everyone. And they really appreciated that, even though you're hired as an engineer or a people analyst or some other role, it's important for you to engage in creative exercises, and you're not sort of pigeonholed to that role, but you're allowed to take the time to think creatively, to speak up and suggest ideas, even if you're not a leader. And from my experience, I think managers and leaders, they really modeled this sort of inquisitive behavior and encouraged employees at any level to speak up and share if they have a great idea. And there's even some great examples with Gmail and Chrome, and some of these iconic products have come from just more open thinking, collaboration across different groups. And these are the qualities that you really get out of doing a design thinking workshop or more creative skill type workshop.
I'm going to segue us a little bit because I know you did a lot around, people operations, which means people themselves, which means the teams that they're on. And something that we run into a lot that we're helping companies think through is whether you're building an idea building a team around an existing idea, or in our workshops or the custom programs we build for companies, when ideas come out of those workshops or programs, how do you build teams around that? And so I don't necessarily need you to speak specifically to that, but I'm curious about what you learned about teams and building teams, and how do you create curiosity and put the right teams together. So how, I don't know, what did you learn maybe in your time more around the building of effective teams?
That's a great question, and one that Google has done a ton of research on that is publicly available. There was a whole project called Project Aristotle. Google loves code names for things. And this one is really the idea, the quote, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which mirrors nicely to the idea of an effective team. And so that research found a number of interesting things, but I would say one of the biggest takeaways is this idea of psychological safety. And that is actually the number one predictor of an effective team. And psychological safety is basically an academic term for feeling safe on a team, feeling like you can take risks and that you're comfortable around your teammates. So you're not afraid to say something stupid. You're not afraid to, be yourself, bring your whole self to work, that type of mentality. And what that research does is it has really created a common language. So when people are starting teams, they're able to do some exercises and engage in certain behavior to really increase the psychological safety of their team early on. And this could be simple things, just getting to know one another. I think I heard the line, the most efficient way to get something done isn't necessarily the best. And I think with teamwork, this is a really nice example of, taking the time, especially in this virtual world, to check in and ask people, how are people doing, before diving right into, we need to get X, Y, and Z done. Let's do it as quickly as possible and move on. I think there's something to be said for letting people share a bit more outside of exactly what you think you need to get done right there. So that was one of the bigger takeaways. And I know you mentioned curiosity, which there's a lot of great research on the importance of curiosity, how, curious people are more effective teammates, higher performers. A number of great benefits go along with that. And in terms of encouraging curiosity at work, there's a few things. I think one, you can start by hiring for curiosity, and that's you could ask questions like, what interests you outside of work? When was the last time you went down a rabbit hole, and what did you find? Those types of questions. There was actually a story of a billboard on the 101, which is the route from San Francisco. It's on the West Coast, and you take it if you go San Francisco to Mountain View. And the billboard said the first 10 prime digits in e.com. And anyone who went to that website then was able to submit their resume for Google. So it's like if someone's curious enough to go there, that might be a good way.
That's really cool.
I didn't see that myself, so I don't think that's still around. So yeah, the first part, hiring for curiosity. And then when people enter the company, doing things like design thinking workshops to signal that's important. And one really interesting example is with Astro Teller at X. His title is the Captain of Moonshots, which is a really cool title. But he's the CEO of X, and he really believes in celebrating failures. And so much so that the story is when a project at X fails, they will actually have a party to celebrate the failure. And this is more because they want to encourage people to admit when the idea is no longer worth pursuing or the concept won't work, and not punish that. So it's a good thing to be curious and pursue those ideas, but letting go of sunk costs and admitting when it will no longer work, and doing things to signal that this person they failed and they're still able to work at the company. I think that's a pretty powerful signal as well.
I think oftentimes signaling gets a bad rap, but I think what I appreciate about the way you're talking about it is it sounds like the teams and leadership at Google takes that seriously. We're signaling things that we actually mean. We're not just something we talk about a lot or that we hear complaints about is innovation theater, where it's sort of, we're just going to do this so we seem innovative or curious. But I think what, at least the outside perception, and it sounds like the reality is at Google, those things actually come to fruition of you're hiring the right people and then doing these workshops. And then that continues to be the case of you actually continue to encourage employees to think and live and work from that sort of curious open box mindset, which I just think is really cool. You had spoken to us a little bit before on who is on it. So I had asked you a little bit about who is on a team, and something you said I thought was fascinating, that in some of your research and practice, who is on the team matters a little bit less than the culture of the team. Could you dig into that a little bit? If you remember some of the research I think you were telling us about of like it's not necessarily about having like the right 5 people, but even if it's maybe some of the wrong people, if that culture is there.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you asked that, because I think what's really interesting about the research is not just the elements that make a team effective, which, just to recap, those psychological safety is, the number one thing that determines the effectiveness of a team. And this is, again, feeling safe taking risks, being vulnerable around your teammates. The next is dependability, feeling like you can depend on your teammates to get their work done. Structure and clarity, having a sense of what your role is and what the role of others on the team is. Meaning, feeling like you're getting a sense of meaning through your work. And impact, feeling like you're able to make an impact and your work matters. And so while I think hearing those, you'd say, yeah, duh, those all make sense. Those sound like nice things to have on a team. What's interesting is the elements that are not necessarily key contributors to an effective team. And one of those is performance, your performance metric. So if you take a number of people all with the highest performance ratings and you throw them on a team, you don't necessarily get an all-star team. And I think we can see some parallels of this in the sports world, on football teams, on basketball, thinking of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. And if you take a number of the
They come back on the podcast. They keep coming up.
The Venture Labs episode in particular.
Sports analogies are really great for teams, because I think we can see you can take some of the best players, put them on the team, and they may not work so well together. And so I think it's just a good reminder that these other qualities that I mentioned are really critical to bake. And those are something that you can build, whereas you might not necessarily be able to improve performance of all individuals. You can build things like psychological safety and structure, clarity, meaning into people's work. So I think that's promising.
And to that point, I think one thing that's really great, speaking of sports teams, is UCLA's famous basketball coach, John Wooden, set a legacy because there was such a team culture, not the individual. And with Google, it's about the bigger team, not just the individual. So I like that something you guys have pinpointed and you're realizing is super crucial. Liz, I can say that we're blessed with our work team, that we realize, hey, it's not just about Garrett, Liz, or Brian, whoever. It's, hey, the greater whole, but also we're serving Lexington first and then the greater community of Kentucky and our startup entrepreneurial ecosystem, all the fun buzzwords. But it really is true. When you are valuing the culture of the team and the people you're working with over yourself, things will change instantaneously.
Awesome Inc.'s just a bunch of B players, but we have great culture. No, I'm just kidding. Brian, we love you. Thanks for hiring us all.
Brian's an A player. We're B players.
No, but I think, even in our community, like you said, we've got so many great community partners here from, I'm thinking of CommerceLex and Base 110 and UK, et cetera. And I think all on our own, so it can apply to a company, but also communities as well. That if that culture is there, then you can sort of raise that innovative tide in the Bluegrass region as a whole. But, and I think what's funny when we were talking about Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen last time, if I remember correctly,
sports, is
that we were talking about how we often celebrate entrepreneurs and flashy success, especially here in America. Mm-hmm. And it was Ben Atkinson from Toyota was talking about how that's a very American or United States quality. But we don't celebrate as often the people who actually do kind of the hard long-term sludge work of building ideas and growing ideas.
The consistency.
Yeah. And I think if I hear what you're saying, you've got to have all those people together who care about the same thing. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in that, especially in the entrepreneurial world of we want a bunch of flashy entrepreneurs who all have new big ideas, but putting all those people on a team, none of the ideas are going to last because they're just going to keep coming up with new ideas. None of them want to build it necessarily long-term. And so I think that has a lot of applications to both the corporate world and the startup space as well. I think that might be a great place to start. I'll give you a second. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to speak to on teams or design thinking? And then we may save the rest of the nuggets for the next episode.
Yeah, I think you gave a really nice sort of segue or teaser to talking more about performance management and incentives, because what I was hearing with you saying we celebrate, flashy entrepreneurs rather than consistency, like they do in other cultures, sort of ties to incentives and what motivates people. And so I think that'll be something interesting to dig into with performance management and how you can create the right goals to incentivize the behaviors you want. So I'm excited to dig in there too.
Sounds good. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Well, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Awesome Inc.'s podcast. And another quick thank you to Lee Rosevere and a few members from our community who provide the music that you hear in this show. Lastly, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, all that jazz. Or even better, come on down to our space. Come be a part of our community and get plugged in, and let's start something awesome together. You guys rock. We'll see you next time.